When love isn't enough, the pain of being rejected by your own daughter, I never thought I'd feel so alone even when I was at home. My name is Eduardo. I'm 42 years old, and as much as people see me as strong, the truth is that inside I carried a void no one could fill. For years, my life revolved around Sofia, my daughter. After Carla cheated on me with Gustavo and essentially abandoned our family to be with him, I became her everything: father, mother, friend, and protector. I still remember the days when she was little, with those curious eyes and laughter that filled the house with life, and I did everything to make sure nothing went wrong. Every morning was a routine of struggle, but also of genuine love. Making coffee, taking her to school, helping with homework, teaching her about respect and responsibility. It all seemed natural, almost a mission I would accept for the rest of my life. But no one prepared me for what would come next, much less for the pain of feeling that all my effort, dedication, and sacrifice were ignored. The real blow came when Sofia began to get closer to Gustavo, the man who came into our lives and seemed to have money for everything, for every gift, for every opportunity I could never offer. I saw a different kind of radiance in her eyes, an enchantment I couldn't compete with. At first, I tried to rationalize it, thinking it was natural for a daughter to be enchanted by someone older, charismatic, and financially stable. But the reality of what was happening was cruel. Little by little, she began to show contempt for my choices and efforts, for the sleepless nights I spent saving every penny to ensure her future. I felt my presence was increasingly devalued, and at the same time, a mixture of anger and sadness consumed me daily. The feeling of helplessness is strange. You feel like you're fighting, but the world around you ignores your struggles, and even your own daughter seems to not recognize all the love you've given her. The breaking point came the day before her graduation. I had planned surprises, wanted to be there, wanted to share in that moment that symbolized years of study and dedication, but Sofia told me coldly that she didn't want me there. She expected me to give up the college fund I'd saved for years, as if my dedication had been nothing more than a minor detail compared to Gustavo's lavish gifts and attention. I felt my heart shatter into pieces I hadn't even known existed. In that moment, there wasn't enough anger to shield me from the pain of being rejected by my own daughter. I remained silent, simply trying to process the magnitude of what was happening, remembering every sacrifice I'd made, every sleepless night, every smile I'd tried to coax from her during difficult times. The internal struggle was intense. I spent days questioning myself, blaming myself, reliving every mistake I imagined I'd made. Being a single father is never easy, but I thought my dedication was enough. I felt invisible, replaceable, and the thought of giving up became constant. There were nights when I simply sat in the living room, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of loneliness, and wondering if it was all worth it. But at the same time, a part of me refused to give in. I knew my sacrifice was valuable, that my integrity could not be sold or ignored. The anger of being rejected mixed with the fear of losing my daughter forever, and I found myself in a cycle of despair and hope, unsure of how to break out. It was at this threshold between grief and decision that I began to realize something fundamental. I couldn't change Sofia, but I could change how I reacted. I decided that protecting my college fund wasn't just about money, but about establishing boundaries and respect, about teaching, however harshly, that choices have consequences. This understanding gave me the strength to face not only her contempt, but also my own sadness. I began to plan my path to recovery, thinking of ways to rebuild my self-esteem, my confidence, and my sense of purpose outside of the need for my daughter's approval. Understanding that grief could be a driving force, not a prison, was the first step toward true change. In the days that followed, I began to realize that I needed to take care of myself before I could deal with Sofia's situation in a healthy way. I spent hours reflecting on my life, my work, my relationships, and everything I had put on hold because of her. I remembered how my friends had drifted away over the years because I had no time for anything other than the responsibility of being a father. The feeling of isolation was suffocating, but at the same time, I realized this was an opportunity to reconnect with myself, to remember who I was before being just a provider and protector. I began writing my feelings in a journal, a practice I had never tried, and discovered that putting my pain into words helped organize my thoughts, making the internal chaos less overwhelming. Each sentence I wrote was an attempt to make sense of what felt unfair and cruel, and little by little I realized that I was, without realizing it, beginning the healing process. Gradually, I realized that my life needed small, practical changes too. I started exercising regularly, watching my diet, and establishing a routine that didn't revolve exclusively around Sophia. It was strange at first, feeling pleasure in simple things again, without feeling guilty, but dedicating myself to myself. I remembered the times I'd skipped events, parties, and get-togethers with friends, all to be there for her, and now I had to learn to balance that dedication. The anger and sadness were still there, but I managed to transform them into silent motivation to rebuild my self-esteem. Each small success, like completing a race or organizing my work more efficiently, became fuel to face the bigger challenge, rebuilding my relationship with my daughter without losing myself in the process. The hardest part was facing the reality of her rejection. I tried for a long time to rationalize that maybe it was a phase, that she still needed time to understand the value of what I did for her. But there were times when the coldness and indifference were so intense that I felt invisible in my own home. At those times, sadness consumed me completely, and I cried alone, with no one to comfort me. It was a strange feeling of abandonment, as if I had done everything right. And yet, I was being punished. But over time, I realized I couldn't allow these emotions to paralyze me. I needed to act. I needed to pick myself up, and above all, I needed to protect myself emotionally, because the pain of being rejected could easily destroy me if I didn't create clear boundaries. I began establishing small rules of respect and boundaries at home. Nothing drastic, just subtle gestures of firmness, maintaining my space, deciding how and when to spend the money I'd saved, establishing schedules and routines that didn't depend on her approval. Each time I set a limit, I felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear of her reaction, fear of widening the gap between us, but relief at finally respecting myself, at finally telling myself that my effort and dedication were valuable and couldn't be dismissed as irrelevant. This change wasn't immediate, and there were times when I almost backed out, thinking maybe I was being too harsh, but I realized that giving in would mean reinforcing patterns that would only make us suffer more in the future. It was during this period that I found support in unexpected places. I began attending single-parent groups, online forums, and community spaces where people shared stories of rejection, overcoming, and rebuilding. Hearing stories from other parents gave me the courage to continue, because I realized I wasn't alone, that the pain I felt had a collective meaning, that others also faced contempt from their children, and still managed to rise up. These connections made me realize that overcoming grief isn't about forcing someone to love or acknowledge us, but rather about finding the strength within ourselves to carry on, even when we feel the world ignores us. It was a hard but essential learning experience. I could be loved, valued, and respected, even if my daughter wasn't ready to see it yet. As I began to rebuild myself, I realized I also needed to change my perspective on Sophia. I couldn't continue trying to compete with Gustavo or the luxury he offered. This realization hurt deeply, because my instinct had always been to protect and ensure happiness for my daughter. But I understood that happiness isn't synonymous with wealth, and that my role wasn't to buy her affection, but to be an example of integrity, dedication, and true love. Every gesture of affection I offered needed to be genuine, without expecting an immediate return, without expecting recognition. This shift in perspective was liberating, yet painful. For the first time, I felt that my worth didn't depend on anyone's approval. I began investing time in myself, in my personal projects, in activities that gave me pleasure and meaning, without feeling guilty about it. One of the most difficult moments was when Sophia confronted me directly about the college fund. She demanded I hand over the money with a coldness that made me question everything I had built up to that point. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief. It was as if every sacrifice had been ignored, and I had invested not only money, but years of dedication and love in vain. I took a deep breath and decided I couldn't give in. It wasn't just about the money, it was about setting clear boundaries, about teaching that choices have consequences. Deciding to protect my fund was painful, but necessary. For the first time, I felt like I was putting self-respect above the desire to please, and that feeling was both liberating and frightening. At the same time, during this period, I endured endless sleepless nights, remembering happy moments from the past and mixing them with the present reality. Every memory of Sophia's childhood reminded me of how cruel life can be when other people's decisions interfere with our dedication. But I began to realize that I couldn't live trapped in the past, that I needed to focus on the present and what I could still build for the future. I learned to accept pain as part of the process, as a constant reminder that life is complex and that our choices won't always be understood by others. This acceptance brought a strange calm, a clarity that allowed me to plan my steps without being overcome by despair or resentment. Rebuilding also involved small daily victories. Every day I managed to maintain my composure. Every interaction in which I didn't give in to pressure, every moment I found joy in my own achievements, strengthened me. I realized that overcoming adversity isn't a giant leap, but a series of consistent, conscious steps, even when no one is watching. This consistency began to shift my perception of myself. I wasn't just the rejected father. I was someone capable of fighting, enduring, and growing in the face of pain. Each personal achievement became a reminder that there was still value in my life, even if my daughter was still emotionally distant. It was through this process that I learned to balance love and firmness. I continued to love Sophia, but I learned not to sacrifice myself beyond what was healthy. Each act of affection was accompanied by clear boundaries and the awareness that my efforts had value in themselves, regardless of reciprocity. This internal shift completely transformed my emotions. I felt anger and sadness, yes, but also pride and hope. I learned that being a father doesn't mean accepting disrespect, and that true love also requires the courage to protect oneself. Little by little, I realized I was building a solid foundation, not only for myself, but for any future relationship, including the one I would one day have with my daughter, if she were ready to see what I had always offered. Over time, I began to notice subtle but powerful changes within myself. The sadness remained, but it no longer paralyzed me. I could see my own strength, realize that the years of dedication, sacrifice, and sleepless nights had not been in vain. Every courageous decision I made, every boundary I set, reminded me that I could be valued without depending on Sophia's approval. I began investing in projects I'd always put off, resuming hobbies that brought me pleasure, and building a network of friends and supporters who strengthened me emotionally. This rebuilding was slow and full of setbacks, but each step made me realize that I still had control over my life and my choices, even in the face of rejection from those I loved most. The final confrontation with Sophia, in some ways, didn't go as I expected. There wasn't a big argument, no shared tears or immediate recognition. What there was a necessary distance so each of us could position ourselves. I stood my ground, and she slowly began to realize that my decision to protect my efforts wasn't selfish, but rather an expression of love and self-respect. It was painful, of course, to feel the silence between us, to realize that moments that should have been shared were being lost. But it was also a learning experience. I learned that pain is part of the process, that sometimes we need to distance ourselves so that respect and love can rebuild in a healthy way. During this time, my self-esteem began to blossom in unexpected ways. I began to feel worthy of respect, capable of loving and being loved, without depending on my daughter's immediate reciprocity. Every achievement, every moment I held my ground in the face of emotional pressure, reminded me that I still had value. I discovered that my strength lay not in controlling my relationship with Sophia, but in controlling my own actions and emotions. This internal shift was liberating. For the first time in years, I felt I could live my life fully, without feeling guilty about protecting myself or setting clear boundaries. I also learned that overcoming adversity isn't a linear path. There were days of relapse, days when the pain seemed greater, when anger and sadness threatened to engulf me. In those moments, I found strength in small victories, in the support of friends, in moments of reflection and self-care. I discovered that acknowledging my vulnerability didn't weaken me. On the contrary, it made me more resilient. Every tear shed, every feeling of loss and rejection served to remind me that I am human and that facing pain is an essential part of growth. I learned to live with my emotions, to accept them, and to use them as fuel to rebuild my life. Finally, I realized that the true meaning of overcoming was not allowing Sophia's rejection to define who I am. The love I felt for her was still present, but now I understood that love isn't submission or total self-denial. Being a father means protecting, educating, and loving, but it's also about knowing how to assert yourself, setting boundaries, and taking care of yourself. This understanding transformed my relationship with myself and paved the way for a future where I could love without losing myself, live without denying myself, and, who knows, rebuild over time a healthier relationship with my daughter based on respect and mutual understanding. Over the next few months, I realized my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. I still missed being close to Sophia. There was still pain in certain interactions, but I no longer felt defeated or invisible. Every morning I woke up and decided to take care of myself, invest in my projects, and maintain my strong stance was a silent victory. I learned that self-respect is the foundation of any healthy relationship, and that allowing someone to disrespect us, even if it's our daughter, only perpetuates painful patterns. This awareness became my guide, reminding me daily that I could love without sacrificing myself, protect without giving in to manipulation, and value my efforts even without immediate recognition. I also discovered the importance of celebrating small achievements. Each of Sophia's spontaneous smiles, each conversation, however brief and timid, began to be valued differently. I learned not to expect perfection or instant gratitude. I learned to appreciate what was within my reach, even if it was just my ability to maintain my integrity and emotional balance. The feeling of autonomy and personal strength became more concrete with each step. The pain that once seemed overwhelming now served as a reminder that I had survived one of the most difficult experiences of my life, and that I could still grow and thrive from it. The impact of rejection and struggle didn't completely disappear, but it stopped being an anchor that held me captive to suffering. I learned that overcoming doesn't mean forgetting or ignoring pain, but rather integrating it into our story as part of the learning process. Every tear, every sleepless night, every feeling of helplessness became fuel to build a more solid life, based on conscious choices and self-respect. Understanding this was liberating because it allowed me to look to the future without fear, knowing that regardless of Sophia's or anyone else's actions, I could keep moving forward, rebuilding my self-esteem and creating a path of dignity and balance. Over time, my relationship with Sophia gradually began to change. There were no miracles, no immediate reconciliations, but small actions began to reveal that respect and boundaries can, indeed, transform relationships. I learned to offer love without expecting submission or gratitude. I learned that loving doesn't mean self-denial. This internal shift gave me peace because I realized that even if the relationship wasn't perfect, I had achieved something greater: self-confidence, awareness of my worth, and the ability to live with integrity, regardless of external recognition. Today, looking back, I can see the entire journey with clarity and gratitude for the lessons learned. I overcame moments of profound pain, intense rejection, and overwhelming frustration, and emerged stronger, more aware, and better prepared to live my life fully. I understood that true love includes respect, boundaries, and self-care. That sacrifice has value even when it goes unrecognized, and that overcoming adversity is, above all, a process of courage, resilience, and self-acceptance. I can say with a peaceful heart that even in the face of the most cruel pain, it is possible to rebuild one's life, rediscover inner strength, and move forward with dignity and hope, knowing that conscious choices can change our destiny and allow us to find peace, self-love, and authentic happiness.